got a letter from my brother. He writes in occasionally, and he talked about a few things, but the one thing I wanted to mention was he was kind of complaining about he's been buying LED high efficiency LED light bulbs, and they just haven't been lasting as long as they're supposed to. They always have claims of, and I've had that problem too. A lot of my LED bulbs have gone prematurely. Some of them in the early days is because they hadn't quite figured it out. And I think the problem now is they're just trying to bring production costs down lower and lower. So they're using cheaper components or whatever. But the only piece of advice I can give would be to say, and we've talked about this kind of thing before, but I would stick with major name brands when you're looking for LED bulbs. I think that helps a little bit. And if you're putting them in an enclosed fixture, you need to make sure that the bulb is rated for that. And you really have to read the fine print on the box.
Because they can heat up, but even though they don't produce as much light, the electronics in them can heat up if they're in a closed space. And then
so when they overheat, that's one of the major causes of them failing early. So if it's an enclosed fixture where the bulb is completely enclosed, you have to make sure that you buy one that's rated for that, and they might be a little bit more expensive.
The United States stocks have dropped on Monday sharply as chipmaker NVIDIA lost nearly $600 billion in market value after surprise advancement from Chinese artificial intelligence company DeepSeek threatened the aura of invincibility surrounding America's technological industry. Brian, I thought this was relevant to what we talk about. You think this is coming for other things, such as the automotive industry, which after I watched it, I'll talk about this later too. I watched a video this morning that made me think, holy crap, are they doomed? Like it's not a hope in hell. So DeepSeek, a one-year-old startup, revealed a stunning capability last week. I'm sure most people have heard about this if you have any connection to social media or the news, but it was a stunning revelation. It presented a chat GPT-like AI model called R1, which has all the familiar abilities and operating at a fraction of the cost of OpenAI, which means that also it's using a fraction of the electricity to train itself, which is interesting because a lot of what AI is going to use is the training of their models. And we talk about how electricity demand will go up for that. Well, Google or Meta's popular AI models cost many times more. This is just a fraction of the cost of those. The company said that it spent just $5.6 million on computing power for its base model, which is in some respects surpassed North American models, compared with hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars U.S. companies spent on their AI technologies. That sent shockwaves through markets. There's going to be more of the same, and I don't think a lot of people realize this. Actually, this is probably a big wake-up call. The United States and some other countries believe that the United States is always going to be a world leader. That's not going to continue. There's just no way it can. It's just China is so formidable and so large and so well educated and so, going things. And that's important that we keep up. Apparently, Biden had this export tax or forbidden export of NVIDIA modules, these chips for computing, and they just went and made their own. And what they did.
Yeah, when you have access to something, it forces you to innovate, and that looks like that's what they did.
So I think this is a wake-up call it's a new world order. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I mean, if they can dominate politically, they can dominate militarily, and thrive better than us. So the Hughes fire in California, the fires are pretty much taken care of in a lot of ways. I think they're all more or less under control because they had rain there, which is actually bad because wildfire areas, when the plants burn, they emit this resin, which prevents anything from, soaking into the water. Just there's flash warnings from that and just rolls downhill. Of course, vegetation's not there to suck it up anymore. And then they're worried about, I was really struck. I have a still here of a weather map forecast for what the humidity was before the rain came. And there's places here like it's LAX %, which is pretty low. But you go up to Malibu, and for some reason it was only 4% there. I think it was the Santa Ana winds were coming in. Santa Clarita was 7%. San Bernardino was 5%. And Chino was 3%. And, wow. Santa Ana itself was 4%, and there was 5%, and it ranged all the way up to somehow 87% in a valley up north, and 20% in a couple of other places. But yeah, I just really was 41%, but holy crap, that is dry.
So anytime the humidity is that low, be prepared for a fire.
So Brian, the state of EVs, Norway is on the cusp of meeting their 100% zero-emission vehicle goal, which was set for this year. And it seems like it's Norway's 2025 goal is for all new cars and light commercial vehicles sold to be zero-emission vehicles. And this means that all new cars sold will be electric or hydrogen-powered. Not too many of those, though. How is Norway achieving this? Policy for one. Norway has implemented regulations that limit the sale of fossil fuel vehicles. Incentives are another way. Norway offers tax rebates and exemptions from fees like registration taxes and road tolls. I think they're lessening those now that everyone's driving an EV, or half the vehicles on the road are. Infrastructure. Norway has invested in charging infrastructure to ensure that electric vehicles have access to fast and reliable charging. That's important. But also, education is the other point here. Norway has educated the public on the environmental and economic benefits of electric vehicles, which I'm kind of thinking doesn't happen all the time here. Like, we could use more of that.
I mean, it's because I always had this feeling of, well, it's inevitable. We are going to switch to electric vehicles, but all of these things would speed it up. There is always more to be done in terms of education.
And for everyone else in the world, well, we're all looking for price parity. We always, for the last one's that going to happen? Well, it's kind of happening. It's been a long goal, and the average price of an EV has fallen by 25% since 2018, so they are going down. In the US, the price difference between a combustion car and an EV was 50% in 2021. That's to say, in 2021, you have to pay 50% more for the equivalent EV, but that's only 15% now in 2023, 2 years ago. So that's made significant progress. And the reason maybe we don't necessarily think that EVs are getting cheaper is because all cars are getting more expensive. ICE cars, combustion vehicles, are getting more expensive, and EVs are kind of meeting now the two together.
Yeah, it's a weird, and we quoted before the average price of a new car in Canada and the US.
It's
and
ridiculous.
I forget the exact numbers, but it's astronomical. It's gone up an insane amount.
It is, and it's EVs in the US and Europe are still considerably more expensive than in China, of course. China has figured out how to do this more or less. The average price for a new EV sold in China in the first half of 2022 was $30,000. That is compared to $8,600 in the European Union. In other words, practically half, and $7,000 in the United States, which is ridiculous. And now keep in mind, we started with premium cars. Luxury brands were the thing at first, when our automakers aren't really coming along too quick with getting the rest of them out. And also, our cars are bigger in North America. 40% of all vehicles sold in China in 2024 were plug-in hybrids or battery electric vehicles, surpassing 50% some months. Yeah, so that's on trend. 80% of all you bought in China in the first half of 23 cost under $42,000, and that's going way down. China has got what they call not plug-in hybrids, but EVs with a generator, essentially. So it always acts as, even though you're using gas to back up that range. And China's a big country. It's the same size as the United States. You might want to go somewhere. So yeah, you can buy an EV and that kick in for range anxiety or for long distances. And it still acts as an EV though. You're not having a weak engine that's hybrid or maybe not quite as strong as a normal car. You get the full EV thing, which I like. And Ram was supposed to do that with a pickup truck. I'm not sure where they're at with that. I think they're a bit behind. So 80% of EVs were under $42,000 American in H1 2023, and that's coming down. Last year, you could buy a brand new Volkswagen ID4 Pro in China for around 30% less than the United States. 30%. Meanwhile, gas cars, like I said, are getting more expensive as the prices of EVs fall. From 2018 to 2024, the price of electric vehicles went down 11%, while ICE prices rose by 14%. So that is kind of taking place.
Yeah, so there's issues moved down enough here in North America. EV sales started with very expensive luxury cars. And yes, there's more options, but we're still kind of stuck in that luxury tier and down that. As you often point out, the deals that you can find, if you shop around, you can definitely find EV price parity in North America. You just have to be a diligent shopper and look around.
So fast chargers are down in price too. These are the chargers that are on highways, and they can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Especially to install them, you have to lease the land, and then you have to have this huge grid connection to have these batteries suck lots of power potentially if you lots of. And these are the ones that are more expensive, than charging at home. So that's because of that. I haven't heard much in the way of that, but now Bloomberg is saying that the price of 300 to 400 kilowatt chargers averaged $58,000 in 2024, or $163 per kilowatt of power. And that's a 26% drop from when the survey was last done just 2 years ago. Clean Technica had that story. And I watched Kyle Connors from Out of Spec Review's video. He went to China. He just got back, and he's got a summary sort of podcast video on YouTube. He was saying that Tesla is behind there. They need to work to catch up, that there's a lot of competition. There isn't here. He said even the crappiest EV he could find, the software was brilliant. There was no screen lag. Yeah. The self-driving was really good. There's lots of different versions of self-driving. Not full autonomous self-driving. There is that too. But I mean, as far as going on the highway and car take control for you. And I really think I'm more and more evidence that, there's entire cities that these automakers have. To their talk last week, there was 102,000 that engineers at BYD had in its R&D development. 102,000. How do you compete with that? Like it's just, there's just no way that our system is around and compete with that. And I personally don't think Tesla's going to compete with that. I think there'll be niche automakers like Porsche, because you want that specific styling and character of a car. But I just don't see North American automakers competing. I mean, we can't keep the Chinese out forever. People say, the Chinese cars will get cheaper and they'll say, hey, this car's better. Why do I have to pay 100% and then they're going to fall apart in the next 15 years, if not sooner? There's just no way. I just can't see it. So that's my update on the transition of EVs, where we stand after 5 years of the podcast.
Let's dip into the mailbag. Okay, just a quick update from our friend Ian, who last we talked about. He was trying to get his 2017 Bolt from the west coast of Canada out here to the prairies in the winter. And James's advice was, don't do it. It's going to be too hard. I think you probably nailed it when you said you need about a 500 kilometer range car to really drive road trips in the winter in Canada. I think that's about right. And an old Bolt would be below 400 kilometers range, maybe 350. So yeah, you encouraged him not to do it. And it's like, going to take your advice.
One thing I didn't mention, Brian, was that they charge slower in winter too. You've had success even in very cold weather of Teslas.
Yeah, as long as the battery is preconditioned.
If you precondition it by setting it into your navigation, I want to charge here, it will heat the battery and it will use some of its own energy to do that. And then it charges well. But the Bolt and many other cars do not do that. Yeah. So I wanted to mention that.
So the letter just says, wow, you guys really dug into my email. I think I'm going to make other arrangements for my trip. I love my car, but it's too bad our infrastructure is lagging so much behind. Cars like that are great city cars. And even, your old Leaf that we talk about is still a great city car.
It is.
But if you want a highway car, 500 kilometers range. I did want to say, I'm always,
by the way, or in Western where it gets really cold.
Yeah, and our cities are far apart and there isn't charging infrastructure that there is in most places. So in other places, make this trip. There is probably still a way to do it. Like if you found hotels along the way, motels along the way that had spent a couple of days. But, not everybody has time to do that.
He was willing to do that, but because large stretch between here and Calgary, which is like 700 kilometers, that is a barren wasteland for charging. In summer, it can be sketchy sometimes. Yeah. So,
but then the other solution I thought of, when you bought your Leaf from Quebec, they sent $1,000, $1,200 to ship it.
Yeah, it was over $1,000. I think this really low cost bidding service where some guys with a big trailer came.
Oh yeah,
they wheeled out a motorcycle to get my car, and a great day for me, a big day.
Yeah, so I think if Ian really, really wanted Bolt in shipping it, being $1,200,
isn't he just making a trip? He's like, what's the deal?
Just spending time in places.
So. Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I have to say, though, that's true. Mention?
Oh, that's it. I think we can go on to the next letter.
Okay. So Ronnie sent us a TikTok video. He thought might be a good material for the show or for more research. Zygord Mednieks on why nuclear hasn't been working as a comeback and what would be needed to be done. Ronnie sent us this clip here.
We like using the same market economics, chips, or a liver transplant. But the limitations of the market economy may be where the answer lies. We don't even have to admit the Chinese got it right, that reactor construction works better in a state capitalist system. The French have shown the way, and if we can rein in our chauvinism for a minute, we might study the way that the French nuclear power industry does in fact work.
Of course, France has a great deal of nuclear. Half of it was offline a couple summers ago for various reasons. They were struggling with overheating waterways and then drought leading to not enough water. So there was reliability issues in that sense. And plus the maintenance, they're getting older, these reactors. China is building new nuclear reactors. The idea is that, a lot of people who are pro-nuclear, why is that going to solve the problem? If you want nuclear, go full on. We watch data centers and things like data centers are buying their own nuclear reactor to keep going in a couple of cases. So why not do that? Why not get efficient at making big nuclear reactors and train a workforce? But again, we have 10 years to do this, 10 years to the grid. If your shovel is not on the ground now, you have no hope of meeting that target with nuclear.
Yeah, I guess the idea is that if it's modularly, build it in a factory, the components, and then assemble it on site, and that's to be cheaper. But, modular homes is one of the things I learned about building our new cottage, because there's people always trying to solve the problem of making cheaper housing that's still high quality, and building the components for a home in a factory is one of the ways that people do that. But I don't think people have really cracked that either. Like, housing is expensive no matter what, unless it's kind of been crappy. So building it in a factory, if it's nuclear, maybe it doesn't solve the problem, because they're all smaller nuclear plants then, and then you just need more of them, and no knows. Okay, so if you want the email is cleanenergy@gmail.com.
And you can also leave us a voicemail if you want, online voicemail at speakpipe.com, Clean Energy Show. Join the conversation on our Patreon page and see some of the supplemental content we post there for free for everyone. And becoming a Clean Energy Show member, though, supports our work, and you get perks in return, such as ad-free episodes delivered in high quality before the public gets them, and shout-outs on our podcast and videos. Most importantly, our monthly Patreon podcast, which is coming up soon, Brian. And I'm going to have a segment on solar in Gaza before and during wartime. It's very important in Gaza. If you've seen any footage of Gaza, and I have, there's always solar panels around, and I wondered why that is, and the answer is very interesting. So we'll have that on bonus podcast, which we'll record in about 8 days.
Yeah, sometime next week. Okay, this next story absolutely relates. The question is from the world's largest solar plus storage project, set to deliver 24/7 power in the United Arab Emirates. So this is in Abu Dhabi. It's going to have 5.2 gigawatts of solar PV, coupled with 19 gigawatt hours of battery electric storage. So solar plus grid storage batteries. And guess what you get out of this, James, when you have that many batteries and that much solar?
This is quite something. I'm quite shocked. This is essentially a nuclear reactor. This is essentially baseload. Everyone says can't be done. We knew could be done from day one of this show, and is now, because of economics and technology improvements, finally happening.
Yeah, so as a shorthand, you always like to say one, because it's hard to imagine these numbers when you talk about power. I don't know what a gigawatt is, but you like to say 1 gigawatt of power, that's basically a nuclear power plant.
Coal-fired power plant, all the big generating types.
Roughly speaking, what of this project with that much solar and 19 gigawatt hours, it is base load power, 1 gigawatt of base load power. So I've said this before, but if I was in the energy business, and I had the option of the incredible headache of building a nuclear power plant, getting to solar panels and a bunch of batteries, like, it's just a no-brainer. I don't understand why anyone go nuclear route. Now, it doesn't have any cost figures in here. So, it's possible this is more expensive than a nuclear, but
I don't think it is. Smaller scale stuff doesn't seem to be. The Emirates would be a good place for solar. In various places in the world, depending on where you are, if you have a 100-watt solar panel, you get maybe 30% of it in a good place, and maybe we have 15% in northern Canada or north here in Canada. So yeah, it is tremendous that they're doing this finally, and when it sets an example for everyone, like people say, well, if they can do it, why can't? And we knew that solar, the boldest solar projects would take place in places that first, and then they would spread to places that have poor solar. Well, even in, the Netherlands and places like that, they're way ahead. Our premier here, the head of the province, said they're going to continue coal. We don't want to shut that down. Good, clean coal. Yeah. It's going to be cheap. Coal's cheap. It's the cheapest way. Solar and renewable stuff's so expensive. Well,
when you have to dig it out of the ground and burn it, as opposed to a fuel cost of zero, that obviously
and then no one is going to want to do business here. No one's going to want hardly much hydro. So our grid is very dirty no matter how you look at it. And yeah, you're not going to set up a data center here. You're not set up a factory because the grid is dirty.
And even if this Abu Dhabi project, even if it costs the same amount as a nuclear power plant, you're going to have it online, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years earlier than your nuclear power plant. And you get then an extra 8 years of power generation out of your project,
There's been solar in this parts of the world that current solar farms are in Saskatchewan, Canada, 10 megawatts in a day. They have such a huge plant, they put 10 megawatts up in a day. So 2 years, 3, 4 years, if there's a permitting issue or a land issue, and it could be years. I think it's done in less than 2. That is way faster than any nuclear timeline. And you don't have to dispose of the waste. You don't have to worry as much about people being offended by it. They are, and especially in the Western world, we have a lot of unnecessary solar. People are, spreading all kinds of crap out there and false information, like else are believing it. So yeah, that is a great news story. And perhaps one of our stories. I had a top 100 list of our stories that would be on it. And by the way, what is your top 100 list of stories? Because we have a 5-year anniversary show that is going to be coming up in February. We want to know what story you heard here on the show that really inspired you or surprised you or stuck in your brain in some way, or maybe one that we missed. So that would be good as well. Brian, why are the trees left standing in the wildfires in California that have decimated neighborhoods but left the odd tree? I was curious about this, and Cal Fire had a very lengthy tweet on this on their social media. Many of you have wondered why trees often remain standing after wildfire, even when nearby houses and structures are destroyed. The answer lies in the difference between wildfires and conflagrations. Conflagrations. The answer lies in the difference between conflagrations. Wildfire often moves as a front, consuming vegetation, not always spreading to everything in their path. Conflagrations, on the other hand, occur when one structure catches fire and spreads through flammable connections like wood fences, igniting house after house, something I'm concerned about here. I have a lot of fence, a lot of old fence, and very flammable fence against weeds. Weeds can be taller than my children out in my house. That's a grass field. This also occurs more easily due to the intense heat produced by a structure fire, coupled with the close proximity of structures. So those structure fires, if your house is close to another structure, and this was the case in Fort McMurray in Alberta, and they're rebuilding the same way, by the way. They haven't changed anything. It was a one-off. This is going to happen again. Climate change isn't real. Let's just build back and everything will be fine. Well, in a modern world, you don't want to build close together. You want higher density housing. You don't want sprawl. But the sprawl is, when you're in a wildfire or a wildland urban interface, your structures may not burn because the heat gets so hot. The firefighters are, down the street, there's a house burning. They will hold the house to control that. But if the whole city's burning, the whole neighborhood's burning, they just let the houses burn, do anything of it. And then it starts the house next door on fire and so on because it does get so hot. And it leaves, flammable emissions from all the oil products in the house, that a giant fireball that's very hot. This also occurs more easily due to the intense heat produced by a structure fire, coupled with those proximity of those structures, says Cal Fire. Now, here's why trees survive, they say. Some trees have natural adaptation to withstand fire. That's impressive. A lot of trees in California, though, aren't, naturally there. They're imported. And do you see footage of trees on?
No.
They're quite spectacular. I don't know if it's the nut cluster or whatever it is just before the spreading out of the palms. Those things ignite very easily embers, and they just start shooting flames everywhere like crazy, like ember flames. And it's like a fireworks that goes on and on. Was, not helpful.
Anyway, no, of course, those palm trees are not in California.
Right. And thick bark acts as a heat shield, protecting their inner layers. So some trees have thick bark. Natural shape sheds embers and debris, reducing ignition risk if their natural shape, sort of resists those embers and keeps them away from the content. Higher moisture content than older building materials slows the spread, so higher moisture content in those living trees than there is in the dead wood in your house. While trees may still be singed, they are often less flammable than structures. Why homes are more vulnerable. This is, again, from Cal Fire. Houses are built with materials and features that make them prone to ignition. Combustible materials, wood, siding, roofing can ignite quickly. That's wood roofing, especially from nearby fires. Openings and vents. We've covered this before. You need an 1/8-inch screen, and there are some fireproof screens you can get for your vents on your roof. In your attic, if you have a vented attic, embers can enter and spark fires inside and even from a distance. And, the way attics are made is that it sucks. They're made in the warm air and shoot it out the top to keep everything dry. So you're actually sucking in the natural ventilation of the system there, actually sucks in the embers. So heat traps, flat surfaces, and air currents can flames when they reach the interior. Removing flammable items within the first 5 feet, that's zone 0 of a home, creates a defensible space, helping to break the pathway for wildfire spread and reducing the risk of flames reaching structures. Take action to safeguard your home against wildfire risks, says CAL FIRE, and you can learn more at readyforwildfire.org. Now, the CBC. I was driving home the other morning from dropping this story on what I talked about at the podcast, and I can't help but think that they were listening to the podcast and did a story on what I was talking about, which is entirely possible. So they did a story on how much of a risk are you and I, Brian, living in a city on the prairies compared to people in a interface with urban areas. And they talked to experts. So while being further south and surrounded landscape, Regina and Saskatoon aren't immune. That's where Brian and I live, is Regina, to wildfires. We aren't immune to them, according to John Pomeroy, a distinguished professor at the Center for Hydrology at the University of Saskatchewan. Brian, why were you never a distinguished professor? And what is a distinguished professor? I always thought you were distinguished.
Yeah, I don't know.
He noted the Corman Park fire, that is a suburb in the boonies just outside of Saskatoon, of last August destroyed $3 million of property. Do you remember that? It was a grass fire that overtook buildings and vehicles and farm vehicles and just wiped them out because it was windy and dry.
No, I missed that.
It wasn't even sunny. So $3 million of property and 300 acres of land on the outskirts of Saskatoon. And he says, under the right conditions, yes, this can happen to us as well. And unfortunately, the right conditions are coming. This is not our 10-day forecast. This is our century forecast. Things are going to get worse. And temperatures are going to go up 6 or 7 degrees here compared to pre-industrial norms. So hotter, potentially drier and windier with larger pressure differentials between hot and cold weather systems or high and lows. And by the way, Fire Weather Author, that's one of the 2 books I'm reading, was on National Public Radio on Friday. So maybe CBC National said we should get this guy on the show. I don't know, Brian.
Yeah.
It just seems the media is following our lead. That's all I'm saying.
Sure.
The host asked him if he thought anyone was paying attention to what was going on with climate change and fires. And here is what he had to say.
Based on the amount of media I've done over the past 2 weeks, Matt, they seem to be listening. I mean, I've been very, very busy, and people have wanted conversations. It's hard to admit that the world isn't the same anymore. We're more vulnerable. And my sense from the conversations I've had is that people are girding loins, starting to face that, and really looking earnestly for solutions. And I really admire that, and I really want to be part of that process.
That's John Valiant, author of Fire Weather. It's a book I'm reading about the Fort McMurray fires and the type of fires that are burning in the 21st century, how they're different, and how dry, windy, hot conditions are changing fire behavior. It's a fascinating book and highly recommended. And I'm also reading the book Ducks about life in the Canadian tar sands. You've already had that on your book report. I'll update you on what I've been learning about that book later in the show.
Yeah, and we've known, for a long time that the climate is changing, but I didn't wildfires to maybe be the thing was going to take over the conversation. We all knew there were going to be more disasters. I wasn't necessarily expecting wildfires. Yeah. And when they happen in a very visible place like Los Angeles, at least it adds some visibility to the issue. And according to the author there, maybe this is starting to get people to wake up. Okay, another story here from Electrek. This is from Washington State. They're coming out with the incentive program. We've talked about many of these programs before. Individual states and cities are often coming up with incentive programs to help people buy electric bikes because it's one of the best ways to decarbonize a city. It's one of the best ways to help things like traffic flow in your city. We don't want our streets congested with a lot of cars. So Washington State now has a program. It's not yet available, but they've got $5 million earmarked for electric bicycle rebates. And it's being funded by the state's emissions taxes as part of the Climate Commitment Act, which did receive a lot of support from voters in the state. So they're putting a price on emissions, and they're taking some of that money and putting it into electric bicycles. So the rebates are going to be from $300 for those making more than 80% of the area median income, up to $1,200 for lower income residents. And it's going to be a similar system to others we've talked about. There's an online portal where you put in your information, and I imagine you have to prove your income level in some way. But instead of a first come, first serve system, they're going to do a lottery. So everybody submits, and then at random, they're going to pick people who are eligible for this program.
Yeah. So I wonder what the odds are of that lottery. Probably better than your power, but no, still not a guaranteed thing. But I like how they're going to cover, it's not the same based on income, because if you're on a poor income and, like bus service is underserved and poor, you get $1,200. That'll buy you there if you need one.
Yeah, $300 to $1,200. That seems like a nice range where a lot of people can do it at different levels.
And if you have a better income, $300 might be a nice incentive to get you to go look at one. Now it is time for a segment we haven't had on the show for a long time. Brian, it's Book Nook. Book Report. That's you singing. We rarely hear you sing on the show.
Oh, that's right. I totally forgot about that. And I guess we don't have this segment on the show very often because I guess we don't read
earnestly
books.
made that as an intro clip to a segment that you only did once. So it's a miracle that I'm reading a book and I can bring it back here because all the work you put into that.
Well, and it's the same damn book, so I don't know.
It's the same book, probably. So, Ducks by Kate Beaton. She is a Canadian author from Cape Breton on the east coast of Canada. Like many people on the east coast of Canada who are in struggling communities, and she was in a small coastal community that survived on lobster fishing and other sort of fisheries type stuff. Well, she went out to nowhere in Canada, basically. It's like 400 or 500 kilometers northeast of Edmonton. It's off into the northern boreal forest. Fort McMurray has people, including 30,000, temporary workers. And then north of the city, there's the city's nothing on the Moogles, these freaking operations, which they are ripping tar and then boiling that oil to get the oil out of the sand. It's an incredible operation. And you did talk about this on the show quite a while ago now, but because of the culture of the oils. And I'm fascinated by one aspect, and that is how people behave differently in an industry where you're getting a lot of money. Because, a welder or a plumber in the oil sands can make a doctor's salary. And if you're, or maybe you have a family and you don't see your family, you fly out to see your family every 12 days after working 12-hour shifts. And then, she talked about cocaine use, which was common. People operating equipment with cocaine in their systems out there. There's this, culture that you cannot take a selfie in the shop with your buddy who you're forbidden. It's oil has so much power. And I think we need to talk more about that because they are lobbying governments to do bad things because there is so much power. And the people who work in the oil industry make so much money compared to renewables that they want to keep it. So she was raised in Mabu, Nova Scotia, fresh out of Mount Allison University in New Brunswick with an arts degree she wanted to pay off. So she went out there. Now she was only, I think, making the point of the book where I'm reading is like $22 an hour. But her expenses were all paid, the food, the lodging.
Yeah, I think and with inflation, I'm assuming those rates have gone up.
Yeah, that's what 20 years ago.
But she managed to pay off her loans, I think, 2 years there.
Yeah, and I think her sister came out and got cancer. But here's a clip. I listened to some of Kate talking about the book. I noticed that everything that I've reading so far is a constant sexual harassment. That's all it is. It's from every angle, every nook and cranny. Sexual harassment is coming at her from all directions. And later in the book, I understand she was even assaulted. So this is her talking about that book, Kate Beaton.
When you're working in a place like the Lone Lake Project and they're just building it, and you look beyond it and it's the forest and you're digging into it, you're so well aware of the barrier that you're breaking between yourself and the natural world. The scale of things just is unbelievable. So of course I had to put those things in the book in some way. Scale. At first that you see something syncrude, you usually see it if you're driving in the dark because you're coming in on a bus at 6 a.m. You'd have to drive in and see the smoke lit up by smokestacks, like fire and things through the darkness. It just looks like something out of science fiction.
Yeah, grand scale of that is the most dirty and most energy-intensive oil extraction in the world. to the world and get rid of the need for that.
And it is a fantastic book. Highly recommended.
Coming up, the lightning round. Stay tuned. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy and transportation.
German media claims Volkswagen may be negotiating with a Chinese company about a joint venture in Germany. Oh, snap! Didn't see that coming. That's on Clean Technica. As Europe gets hotter, more people are expected to die from extreme heat, outweighing the reduction in those killed by very cold weather. Yeah, people die in cold weather. Now there's less of them dying in cold weather. Now there's some of them dying in weather, and they're saying the net benefit is bad. There's a net negative. So cities in Northern Europe, regions such as the UK and Ireland, and by the way, hello, Ireland, you had a terrible windstorm there. I hope our listeners, including Sean, are safe and sound and everybody's okay. And your daughter, who is trying to become on the Clean Energy Show a voice actor. And Scandinavia would see a reduction in deaths due to milder winters, according to a study published in the journal Nature Medicine on Monday. But this positive effect would be overwhelmingly eclipsed by the rising death toll further south. In total, it means a higher loss of life from extreme temperatures. That story is on Bloomberg. By relying on nuclear power, France achieves a record of 95% carbon-free electricity production in 2024. 95% carbon-free. And some renewables. So solar power is growing in every EU country, Brian. I've got a map here, a graph, all stuff that's going on here. And in 2019, Austria, for example, was at 2% and now is 12%. And Spain was like 6%. It is now 21%. And Portugal, 3 to 14%. Greece, 9 to 22%. Even Cyprus, the island is from 4% to 20%. So all these countries, Poland went from 0% to 9%. In that one in 5 years. So we could be doing, it's so frustrating, we live in a place where we could be doing that. Yeah. I don't think solar has even hit the 1% mark here, and it's a very frustrating place to live. It is time for a CES Fast Fact. Speaking of big oil, evil big oil spent $445 million, almost $500 million to keep Trump in Congress and deployed his work. This is from Marquez Brownlee, a YouTube influencer and tech reviewer. He said there's a really interesting video that somebody made for him, another channel, when they asked him for his specs of his 2025 Dream smartphone. So he gave all the specs of the different cameras and the different things that he wanted and how much it would actually cost. Well, the total was about $500 for his dream phone. This is the guy who knows all tech and wants the best of the best. So it was about $500.
Top of the line phone.
But what struck me was the 600 milliamp hour battery was only $13. So, battery technology and cost and energy density is improving. The battery was a big part of phones for a long time.
Open up a smartphone, it's like 90% battery in there. All the other components have been miniaturized as much as possible. So even though the phone is mostly battery, that only costs $13. That's crazy.
A temperature anomaly of 30 degrees Celsius will hit the North Pole on February 2nd, according to forecasts 2025. Yeah, that was a forecast that was run on January 26th of this year, 2025. 30-degree anomaly, that degree is above normal at the North Pole. That is not... We talk about how the more north you go, the more anomalies there are in temperature due to climate change. That one is... Well, it's not going to burn down. For a second there, I had this fear. Oh, God, last time we did this, the place burned down. But that solar power increased 64% in 1 year. And I assume it's because they're all granola crunching hippies down there, Brian. Not that it's an economical way of generating electricity. China built only 3.9 gigawatts of nuclear in 2024, and that's only 29% of the 13.5 gigawatts of hydro, and 1%, that nuclear is 1% of the 370 gigawatts of wind and solar they built in 2024. So they're adding a lot of power, but it's mostly solar. And finally, this week,
they're still doing nuclear, but they're not in any way stopping from all the other massive investments in solar and so forth.
Okay, finally this week, just this. Solar generated 11% of EU's electricity, and that has overtaken coal. So finally, coal has got their kick in Europe, partially thanks to Putin. For the first time in history, solar, just solar, not wind and solar. Wind is big in Europe. Solar eclipsed coal, and coal, of course, is declining.
And that is our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Around social media, we're Clean Energy Pod. And you can join our Patreon community for free and get some special content not found elsewhere. And that link is in the show notes. You can buy something from our merch store, and we have that link as well in the show notes. And please rate and review us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your podcast app is. And make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button on the podcast app to get these episodes delivered every week.
And like I said, our 5th anniversary is quickly approaching. If you have any favorite story from our 5-year run that stuck with you, drop us a line, please. cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Thanks to all our Patreon members, and especially those who are Clean Club executive members, which I mention on the show every week: Green Bastard, Brent Routley, and Ryder. Patreon podcast is coming up soon, as I said, so if you have any things that you want us to talk about, do so. I will be doing this story on Palestinian solar in the Gaza Strip. And if you become a paying member of our Patreon page, you will get that free podcast that we do every month, and ad-free episodes, early access to our episodes, and thank you credits on our video podcast, and shout-outs on our audio podcast from time to time. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.